This is History for the Reckoning, a podcast that dives deep into the history that's hard to hear but critical to understand. Season 1, American Concentration Camps, the story of World War II Japanese incarceration. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Ford. Over the last few episodes, we've detailed the experiences of Japanese and Japanese Americans in the camps and mentioned how the vast majority of Japanese chose to comply with government demands, to seem like good, loyal Americans, or to follow their Nisei leaders in the JCL. But many of them were aware that what the government was doing was not only unjust and unfair, but unconstitutional and illegal, and as such, many chose to stand up for their rights in a variety of ways. Relating the history of resistance in this period is my guest, Frank Abe. Frank is a historian, advocate, and artist who has documented and explored the Japanese incarceration experience for decades, often through art. I came across his work first through his incredible documentary, Conscience and the Constitution. He has also written many books, including a graphic novel that covers the incarceration story entitled We Hereby Refuse, and an anthology of essays, letters, and other materials from the incarceration called The Literature of Japanese American Incarceration. Frank Abe, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure, Spencer.
So when I asked you where you thought we should start when talking about resistance within the Japanese community, you suggested starting by looking at the Alien Enemies Act used to arrest Issei community leaders at the outset of the war. So remind us what happened.
The community leaders who were the Issei, thousands of them were arrested immediately after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And the basis for this was a little-known 1798 law called the Alien Enemies Act. It left the community without leadership. It left the families without source of income. Their bank accounts were frozen as enemy aliens. And into this void stepped a group called the Japanese American Citizens League, a group of young 20-year-old, bright-eyed, fanatically, pathetically loyal American citizens. And the arrests of the Issei were swift, and unfortunately, in some parts of our community, they were kind of accepted because, well, Dad is not a citizen. And we're citizens, so we'll be safe because we're citizens. I was born here in Seattle or San Francisco, and they're not going to take me. And so they were willing to let go of the elders, the immigrant generation, because they were Japanese. And again, this is within our own community too, mind you.
Yeah.
And in Seattle, they formed the JCL formed the Emergency Defense Council, the Emergency Defense Committee, and in Los Angeles, they called the Anti-Axis League, and it had a big sign on their storefront saying "Anti-Axis League. We're with you, America, in the fight against the enemy, against the Axis powers, Germany and Japan. In other words, don't arrest us because we're Americans."
Right.
The military really did not believe that Japan had a capacity for a land invasion of the U.S. Balloon bombs, sure. Submarines, one-man subs, sure. But not a land invasion. However, within 6 weeks of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, which authorizes the mass removal of any and all persons from the West Coast, the western half of the Western states. And the posters that go up say, famously, instructions to all persons of, in big letters, Japanese ancestry. You are hereby required to report to a certain date and time, this place, this time, this street corner, to be picked up by a Greyhound bus. You pack all that you can carry. The deadline is about 1 week from now, this poster.
Jeez.
And this order applies to aliens and non-aliens alike. And that was the moment, I believe, that my parents' generation, the Nisei, realized that their U.S. citizenship would not protect them.
Right.
That they were subject to this mass removal order by the U.S. Army, regardless of their citizenship. Now, do I get a fair hearing? The Constitution provides me the right of due process and my right to a day in court individually. You need to individually find out whether I, Frank Abe, have any connections with the Japanese military or the Emperor of Japan, or even if I have sympathies towards the Emperor of Japan. You need to question me personally, examine the evidence. If I had cell phones back then, they'd be going through my cell phone in 1942. But no, none of that. You're Japanese. If you have 1/16 Japanese blood in your heritage, off you go. And so this is the movement, and this is the injustice in a nutshell: is the violations of the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution, right of due process, and equal protection under the law.
So it kind of sounds like you see the resistance starting here when people realize.
You would think so, Spencer. No.
Okay.
You would think so, Spencer. And I wish that were true. I wish that were true. Only one voice among Japanese Americans spoke out against evacuation. That's as they called it back then. Journalist named James Omura in San Francisco. He testified to a congressional committee, told the Tolan Committee, and he said, has the Gestapo come to America? Have we not risen in righteous anger at Hitler's mistreatment of the Jews? I mean, he's making the connection right there. I mean, they know what's going on in Germany. Have we not risen in righteous indignation at Hitler's mistreatment of the Jews? Is it not incongruous then that citizen Americans of Japanese descent should be similarly mistreated and persecuted? This was in his written testimony to the Tolan Committee after his oral testimony. Of course, I believe he was either followed or preceded by leaders of the Japanese American Citizens League who pledged wholehearted cooperation with the government in return for fair and humane treatment. They were concerned about the grandparents, or the parents. They were concerned about the old men and women. They didn't want, as I wrote in the graphic novel, which is a quote from Mr. Mike Masaoka. Do you want bloodshed? Do you want tanks to come into our ghettos? Do you want bloodshed on the streets? I think we had no choice. We certainly don't want people murdered on the streets. We don't want tanks to come in and destroy the little ghettos that we have enjoyed. Mr. Masaoka believes that by cooperating with the government and pulling the rug out thereby from any individual or group resistance, that they could then secure humane treatment for their people. Again, this is their people because they have emerged as the only national spokesman for the Japanese community in America, because the Issei generation, who would have been the spokespeople, had all been arrested and were in FBI custody and had been taken to DOJ internment camps in Montana, North Dakota, and New Mexico. Again, I'm a child of the 60s. And when I first learned about it, my reaction was like yours. Of course, you rose up in a mass resistance to these army soldiers coming in and forcing you onto these buses at the point of rifles and bayonets. And they go, "Oh no, it was the army. It was an army order. We had to obey the army." And I don't know, JCL. They said we should do it. We should do it for our own good. And that's the story. There was absolutely no Japanese American resistance to the mass removal. Any resistance came later, like 2 years later, with those who resisted the draft. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I wonder if we can transition then to one of the first points of true resistance that you wanted to discuss, which is Mutsuye Endo. So we're going to hear about her case in depth in our Supreme Court cases episode, but I wonder if you can tell us quickly, who was Miss Endo?
It took a white lawyer in San Francisco. And again, where were the lawyers at this time? The ACLU was friends with FDR. Roger Baldwin was friends with the Roosevelt White House. And the ACLU did not take a position on the evacuation. The Quakers did, but not the ACLU. And so Japanese America was basically left on their own to receive, coffee and donuts from the Quakers when at the point of departure, and from churches who would visit them in camp. It was all very nice. But there was no mass filings by lawyers except for a guy named James Purcell, attorney in San Francisco, who had a client and who was actually friends with Saburo. I think was it Saburo Keto, one of the JCL leaders in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I think it was Saburo Keto, and he had a client who was taken to the Tanforan racetrack out of San Francisco as the first point of removal in the assembly centers, so-called assembly centers. Purcell is the son of a Folsom of a guard at Folsom Prison Penitentiary. He says, I grew up the son of a prison guard. I know what prisons look like. This is a prison. This Tanforan Assembly Center, this is a prison. The families were housed. He couldn't believe families, babies, children were housed in horse stalls at the racetrack where they moved the horses out and moved these families in. And manure was still sticking to the walls, and all they did was they whitewashed the horse stalls, but you could still see the manure sticking to the walls. So Purcell said, I've got to file a habeas corpus case. I need a plaintiff. I need a name. And he had been helping a group of Japanese American Nisei civil servants in Sacramento who were protesting their firing by the state of California on outrageously crazy, trumped-up charges that they were, they're the subjects of the Emperor of Japan, that they were disloyal to the U.S. I mean, these are just filing clerks, normal, like your mother and my mother. They're just, and she was in the DMV, stamping papers, and so he had been working with these clients, and he went and looked among them to find what he called the perfect plaintiff, someone in his mind who could not read or speak Japanese, who had a family member in the U.S. service already, and who did not attend a Buddhist or Shinto church, because those things were considered at that time red flags. So he's trying to find a perfect plaintiff who would not have any baggage that juries or a judge could get tripped up on. So she was Christian, and she had a brother in the army, and she didn't go to Japanese, and she didn't attend Japanese language school. So Purcell had persuaded someone, and he had like 3 or 4 names. Ruby didn't want to do it. Another woman didn't want to do it. Mitsuya says, well, I really don't know it, but if Ruby won't do it and so-and-so won't do it, I guess I'll do it. I'll do what's best for the group. And so she became, she was recruited to be the named plaintiff in a Supreme Court test case of habeas corpus. And little did she know that it would take, of course, no one knew how long World War II was going to last, but little did she know it would take, 2.5 years, almost 3 years, for her case to wind its way to the Supreme Court, where it was finally adjudicated. And so her case, and she wasn't just a passive player here. She had to keep the case alive by having her body, habeas corpus, her body in camp. It happened to be first Tule Lake, then Topaz. The government knew they were violating the principle of habeas corpus, so they sent their top lawyer out from the WRA to negotiate with her, offer a deal. You can go, Mitsuya, just you can go anywhere you want. You can leave Topaz and you're free. You can't go back to the West Coast because that's still a security zone, the Western Defense Command zone. But anywhere else, and she said no, because her attorney advised her, if you take the deal, your case will become moot, and they'll drop the case.
Right.
And she said no, and little did she know then that this decision to pursue the case would cause her to be imprisoned for another year at Topaz, while her sisters, she's watching them be relocated to jobs in Chicago, very popular destination. So she stayed in camp until almost the very end.
Oh, I mean, an incredible act of bravery on her part. Literally doesn't know what she's signing up for, but chose to do what was best for the group. Just incredible.
Yes. Just to close the loop, her case was heard by the Supreme Court November 1944. Judges ruled that the U.S. government had no right to detain admittedly loyal U.S. citizens for an indeterminate length of time. and ordered the War Relocation Authority to ordered the Western Defense Command to shut down the exclusion zone on the West Coast and the WRA to close its 10 concentration camps. In an attempt to get ahead of the news, the decision, word of the decision coming down was leaked to the Roosevelt administration. So they got a press release on the Sunday before the Monday morning to announce, we're going to close the Western Defense Command and we're going to close the 10 camps within 6 months to a year.
Right.
It's just
This
silly,
was our idea,
silly
yeah.
face saving. Yeah, exactly. It's our idea. Yeah, it's our idea.
So I want to turn to one thing that did happen in the camps that inspired a lot more resistance, a lot more active resistance at least. And so that was the release and the issuance of what they called the loyalty questionnaire. Can you tell us where, when, what that was? Yeah, why it was a big deal?
Spencer, if only they had, as I said, asked me, Frank Abe, if I was loyal. And by the way, I'm too young. I was not in the camps. I was too young. But if they had asked me if I was loyal, if they'd given me the questionnaire before taking me away from my home, my schooling, my job, my family, and my friends, I probably would have said sign the questionnaire. Say sure, I'm loyal. I'm loyal.
I love America. This is great.
I love America.
I'm all for it.
And many of the people, and many of the ones who later became the so-called troublemakers at Tulare Lake said, if you'd asked me that question before you did all these injustices to us, I probably would have said yes. After you do all these terrible things to us and treat us like you really don't want us in this country, do you? How on earth can you think that we're going to answer yes to this question? So one of every 10 eligible incarcerees in the camps answered no or refused to answer or qualified their answer, which was a remarkably high, more than the government, the War Location Authority thought it would be. They thought this would be a slam dunk because they said the JCL said they're loyal going in, and now they're all of a sudden they're really pissed off. The questionnaire was designed to do two things, and it's really unfortunate they got mixed up. The Army needed. JCL was advocating for the Nisei to be eligible for military service, to be drafted, or to be at least be accepted to be accepted as volunteers, so they could fight in the Army and prove they were just as American as everyone else. Same time, so the Army needed some form after you brand a people as disloyal, suspicious, and force them all into these camps. How can you then accept them as volunteers in the Army unless there's some paper trail to show that they're not spies or saboteurs? Because that was the premise of locking everybody up, was they're spies and saboteurs, or potentially spies and saboteurs. Because
there's no undo button on that one. Yeah,
there's no, because we couldn't tell in a short period of time, so we just said everyone had to leave because we couldn't tell the good apples from the bad apples. At the same time, they also needed a program, the War Relocation Authorities, the civilian administration of the camps, some way to clear young men and women, most of the Nisei, for jobs and college, completing their college in the Midwest and East. Because the name of the administration is the War Relocation Authority. Their purpose was to relocate Japanese Americans off the West Coast, but assimilate them into the mainstream America, the Midwest and the East. So there was a program for resettling young people, especially. The old people didn't want to move. The young people into opportunities East and Midwest, which is often mistaken by my parents' generation as a wonderful opportunity that was granted them and a positive outcome that came from the camps. Positive outcome, because they don't have they needed to have a bigger picture of what was happening, and they didn't at the time. So they did some way. It's a paper trail, beautiful. John J. McCloy and of the Army and Dylan Meyer of the War Location Authority meet, and they say, let's combine our two questionnaires, and we'll give it to them, and we know they'll all answer yes, and this will be a perfect paper trail. 1 in 10 refuse to answer it because the questions are poorly drafted, and since you're asking about it, I'll go through. There's 28 questions. The first 25 are progressively more invasive besides name, date, family members? What magazines do you read? What clubs do you belong to? What Japanese magazines do you read? Then the question 27 was, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? And yes or no. It's not a true. It's a yes or no question. And 28 was, will you forswear? No, will you swear allegiance and obedience to the United States of America, and will you forswear any allegiance or obedience to the Emperor of Japan? So I should have said, okay. So on 28, the elders, the Issei, go, how can I forswear my allegiance to the Emperor of Japan when I couldn't become a U.S. citizen in the first place? If I do that, I'll become a stateless person. So that's a trick question. And if a Nisei answers that, American citizen answers that question, if I forswear allegiance, is that going to be used as evidence against me at some future tribunal that I once was or once held loyalties to the Emperor of Japan? Trick question. Number 27, of course, are you willing to serve the armed forces wherever ordered? Sounds like, are you willing to enlist right now? The question 27 was mistaken as an actual enlistment invitation. And a lot of guys said yes because they were chomping at the bit to serve. They wanted to fight Hitler and Mussolini. They wanted to help in the war effort, and they did, and they served with valor, as everyone knows, and made great sacrifices. The logic question comes, Spencer, in February 1943, which is like 1 year after they've been moved first to the racetracks and fairgrounds, and then to the permanent concentration camps, the 10. And so no one knows the consequences of a yes or no answer, interestingly enough, not even the government. And soon news comes out, all of those of you who answered no are going to be segregated. And the JCL actually advocating segregation. I put that memo in the anthology where the JCL is advocating segregation of the dissidents and troublemakers because their own leaders in JCL are getting beaten up in camp. And this is the only way to protect them. So the program is to separate. Let's separate all those who answered no, and we will consider them disloyal. The problem here, Spencer, is that you can't be convicted on your thoughts, only on your actions. And these people have committed no overt actions against the U.S. government or for the Emperor or for the Japanese army. They just answered a question on a piece of paper, but the binary system of government paperwork is, okay, you're in the no pile. 20,000 of you are going to go to Tule Lake. Leave the main camp, your existing camp. We're going to move you to Tule Lake, and we'll move out equal number of people from Tule Lake and distribute them into the camps. So that's how Tule Lake becomes. It's one of the 10 original camps. It becomes the segregation center, Tule Lake Segregation Center. They bring in a hard-ass camp director named Raymond Bess. He fortifies it with double man-proof fence, machine gun, triples the machine gun towers, and brings in a military police battalion to patrol the area, guard the area. So Tule Lake is where you have the most dissent and resistance against the government. That is at one point violent. So I feel that the questionnaire, again, this is not something we've talked about in my community until recently, Spencer, is that until recently my community regarded those who answered no in the questionnaire as, they're disloyal. They were a flag. They loved the Emperor of Japan. They were.
Even after the war.
Even now, those who are still alive think that the no-nos were would not pledge allegiance to the flag of the U.S.
I just want to reiterate to our listeners how crazy the story is that if you answered 2 questions, quote unquote, wrong on a standardized test, you end up in a maximum security prison for the duration of a war that has no end, as far as you know.
No one knew how long the war would last. This is how America, rehearsed, if you will, for the concentration camps of today. It's worth talking about this now in this podcast, Spencer, because we need to understand how this worked before, so we can see the same warning signs happening now. Going back to the questionnaire, so this was my community never regarded the questionnaire as a sign of resistance, but those who answered no to it or refused to answer were resisting authority. So that's the story of the questionnaire. It's not just the what museums and school books popularly call a question of loyalty. It was the creation of disloyals. But the government created disloyals, 20,000 of them, on paper, and that label stuck with them for 80 years.
Now, I wonder if we can get into the psychology of someone that says no. What do you think they anticipated upon that? Like, some of them must have known this could end very badly for me for choosing to say no, while some of them thought, I have good intentions, so this will be fine. What was the range there?
Well, I think it was a test of their conscience. It was a test of their mettle. That the obvious answer, of course, was easy, but you're sitting there with nothing to do in this prison camp, and it was the one thing they could do to protest their treatment was to refuse to answer as a means of protest, or answering no. And many of those who answered no said it was how I felt at the time. I was angry. They said they were angry.
I mean, just amazing that I know I'm a spineless person. I would probably toe the line and say yes, and I would go on with my day. So really incredible that anyone would choose the alternative. It is a really impressive thing. So I guess we can transition now to more organized resistance. So as you described, the loyalty questionnaire, it's not like people decided en masse to mark those, except by coincidence that there were many people who had moral objections to those questions. But there was some organized resistance when the draft came around. I wonder if you can start speaking to that, particularly at Heart Mountain.
And see, the thing here is that people think of camp as like one long experience. And it was one that was marked by a series of divisions that the government stirred up. The first being segregation, the second being the draft, and the third being the Renunciation Act of 1944, which we'll also get to later. So this is the draft. So you're living at home, Seattle, April 42, you're forced to leave. February 43, you get the loyalty questionnaire administered. February of 44, the government says, we love these Nisei volunteer soldiers so much that we got through the questionnaire. And by the way, the loyalty questionnaire is really called the application for leave clearance. It was never called the loyalty questionnaire. We love those Nisei soldiers so much, we want more, and we need more, quite frankly. So we're going to give Mike Masaoka what he wants. We're going to announce the draft. Reapply the draft for the Japanese Americans in camp, and 315 in all refused the draft for various reasons. 85 at the camp in Wyoming called Heart Mountain organized, and it was the only organized draft resistance or resistance per se in the 10 camps, excluding to the Lake Segregation Center. They felt that this was the last hitch they had to hang their hat on to protest not the draft, but the underlying event from 2 years before, which was mass removal and incarceration, the unconstitutionality of our being here in the first place. We shouldn't be here. How can you draft us in this place when you put us in the first place? So they held meetings, collected dues, elected officers, and
incredibly organized.
Oh yeah, they had meetings in the mess halls that were 400 would attend, and Kiyoshi Okamoto he was a civil engineer from Hawaii. Was the at first he was the Fair Play Committee of One, and then others came around to become intrigued by his expounding on the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And so they issue manifestos that go on to extol the constitutional rights that are being violated, and to say that we refuse, we hereby, because of all the injustices you've done to us here, we hereby refuse to report for physical induction or the evacuation if and when we are called, in order to contest the issue.
Wow.
We are here, we are here to take a stand for our constitutional rights, and we are going to break a law in order to get a test case into court.
Oh, so they knew exactly what they were doing from the outset.
The core group, yes. Again, without any hearings, without due process of law, without any charges filed against us, without any evidence of wrongdoing on our part. 110,000 innocent people kicked out of their homes, uprooted, herded like dangerous criminals into concentration camps with barbed wire fences, and then without, this is all in all caps here, without rectification of the injustices committed against us, nor without restoration of our rights as guaranteed by the Constitution, we've not been given our rights back. We are ordered to join the Army through discriminatory procedures into a segregated combat unit. Is that the American way? No. The FPC believes that unless such actions are opposed now and steps taken to remedy such injustices and discriminations immediately, the future of all minorities and the future of this democratic nation is in danger. So this is a principled stand that was, again, derided by those in our community as, oh, they're just draft dodgers. They're trying to get out of serving. They're afraid. They're just, or they're disloyal.
They saw the broader implication.
They saw that they understood completely, and it was, again, principled. It was a principled protest.
Yeah, I wonder if you can tell me about who these men were. It sounds like they're almost all men, if not all men. Who were they? What were their backgrounds? How did this thing get started?
Well, you know what? Women didn't serve in the military in World War II. So, yes, they were all men. The Army was not drafting women in World War II. That's straight. They were just young men who got the draft cards in the mail, addressed to Block 4, Barrack 2, Hart Bottom, Wyoming. And they were a time and a place to report for the physical examination, the pre-induction physical in Powell, Wyoming. And there's a bus that would take them from the camp to the Army induction center in the nearby city of Powell. And the first day, a handful don't show up for the bus. The next day, a few more. By the next day, a lot more don't show up. And in all, 63 refuse to be drafted. Yeah. There was a steering committee. As I said, the elected officers collected $2 in dues, which is a lot of money back then. And they had lists of memberships.
Particularly in camp when you only made at tops $19 a month. So yeah,
exactly. Oh yeah. They elected and Kiyoshi Okamoto, of whom we know very little because he passed away in the 50s as a loner. So there's no interviews with him. He wrote a lot of manifestos, but personally we don't know who he was. Frank Abe, however, who I feature in the film, is well known. Quoting Frank, because Frank says it better than I ever could. Frank was he was a judo master, Frank Abe, and so he had a core. Judo, they have a strong core. He had a strong core of what's right, what's wrong, and that this was wrong. Others in the Fair Play Committee leadership were Guntaro Kubota, who was the only Issei member of the leadership. Because he was an Issei and not a citizen, he could not be drafted. But people said, why are you leading this group, Kubota? I mean, you don't get drafted. And he goes, well, I believe in what you guys are doing. I believe that you're fighting for our rights, and I can help by translating your bulletins into Japanese, into Nihongo, for the other Issei leaders. There was one woman, his wife, Gloria Kubota, who was an Nisei, a very good English-speaking Nisei, delightful woman. She's in the film too. Delightful, a baddie kind of woman, really wonderful personality, warm. And she says, well, the boys need to raise the money, and it's the Isseis who have the money. So we had to translate the bulletins to get the essays to donate, support the defense fund. Yeah.
So Frank Emmy happens to be one of my favorite historical figures ever. And I just think one fascinating thing about him is you mentioned that this Issei had no chance of being drafted, but even
Yeah.
someone like Frank Emmy, who is in his 30s, already married with children, very
Yes.
likely wouldn't be drafted. He did not have to put himself in danger.
I was getting there. He was not eligible for the first call, at least of the draft at the time. So he still believed that it was his calling to stand up and pay the price as an example of standing up to authority, standing up to unjust authority.
I wonder if we can go into what those consequences were for them. So after they've chosen not to show up for the draft, voice their opinions very publicly in the camp newspaper, in these meetings, what were the first pushback, I guess, and how did it escalate from there?
Well, they were derided in the camp newspaper, which was edited by a fellow named Haruo Imura. And he wrote very nasty editorials about weak-kneed delinquents huddled in the shadows of boiler rooms and latrines, plotting their weak-kneed draft dodgers. They were in the boiler rooms and latrines because that's they posted. They posted their notices in the latrines because, like, even in college, right? You put the party notices in the bathroom. That's where people see it.
That's where everyone goes.
That's where it goes. Yeah, they're posting notices in the latrines. It's not like they're hanging out there. But they were ostracized by the leadership of the camp. They were shunned. Again, this was, as are most protest or civil rights movements, a small minority of people of good faith, good conscience, who are willing to put their bodies on the line and stand up for what they believe is right in the face of injustice when it's needed, at the time that it's needed, not after the war or 50 years after the war, but now.
You mentioned they went to prison for this, so how did that happen?
The U.S. Attorney for Wyoming indicted them for draft evasion, and they went to court, and the judge instructed, it was a bench trial, so there's no jury, and the judge said that he would not hear any moral or legal arguments, which is what they came prepared to argue. And it's only, did you report, the law says, the Selective Service Act of 1940 says you have to report for induction at a certain place, certain time. And were you properly given your notice? Yes. Was the notice addressed to the correct person? Yes. Did you report for induction on, the certain date and time? No. Then you're guilty. It's like a traffic ticket. Then you're guilty.
Wow.
And so the sentence is 3 years and 3 months in a federal penitentiary. One judge in Idaho, in a related case, says, I'm giving you this sentence because it extends past the expiration of the Selective Service Act of 1940, because I don't want to see you back here in court again on a repeat violation of the same law, trying to make some stupid point perhaps. But I don't want to see you back in court, so I'm giving you a 3-year sentence. With good time served, they were released after 2 years. Half went to the federal penitentiary of McNeil Island. I'm sorry. Yeah, Leavenworth, Kansas. The older men, Frank Abe included, the married men, and the younger guys went to McNeil Island, Washington, here in south of Seattle. And they got out. They were had a hard time finding jobs. Of course, all Japanese at the time had a hard time finding jobs, but they some of them kept gathering for holiday dinners, parties, but Japanese America as a whole, Spencer, did not talk about the camps after the war. So it's not surprising that they didn't talk about it either. And it wasn't until kids like me came along and started asking questions that they finally opened up about it. And when a friend of mine named Frank Chin, the writer Frank Chin, introduced me to the Frank Emmy and James Omura, I recognized immediately this was the real story of the camps, was those who protested and those who resisted, because it was a question I had immediately, was why wasn't there mass resistance at the moment of exclusion and incarceration? At the moment they were kicked out. And so that's the complex story of how it all happened. And so, it didn't come out until the redress campaign of 1978 to 1988, when we began to exhume all the stories of camp, and among them the stories of the draft resistors. But the focus was mostly on the injustice of camp itself. We didn't talk about JCL, we didn't talk about the resistance, because we didn't want opponents to latch on to any side issues like hatred of JCL and stuff, or JCL did encourage us at the time. They approved it. So once redress was signed by President Reagan in 1988, it enabled us, Frank and I and others, to kind of advance the story further. So by the year 2000, finally it came out with our documentary Constitution. Until the 1990s, until after redress was finally passed and won, it still took another decade for my community to begin to grapple with and talk about the fact of camp resistance, because this was a story that had been suppressed by the JCL, and one that was often misunderstood. So I often like to feel that our benefit in doing these stories was to show the children of Frank Abe and the other Fair Play Committee members that why their fathers were in federal prison for 2 years during World War II, because they, even what the fathers told them, it didn't quite make sense. So, telling the whole story, now they get it, and they a lot of them are very appreciative, and not clear their fathers' names, but at least recuperate their reputations inside the community, inside the social circles.
It's definitely well appreciated today, because my generation has come up on narratives of civil disobedience and resistance being admirable and heroic and the appropriate action. So these stories coming out now, I love to see a receptive audience to non-Japanese and Japanese alike.
Well, I'm at a loss for words here, Spencer, because James Omura, the journalist I mentioned, says, I didn't think I'd be recognized for my civil disobedience until 50 years after my death. Fortunately, we did it while he's still alive. So there's that gives me feels for what Jimmy felt.
Circling back to the concentration camps of World War II, there was one other form of resistance that you wanted to touch on that I wonder if we can speak to, which is when the government tried to give the option to renounce your citizenship to do a self-deportation. So particularly poignant at Tule Lake. I wonder if you can speak to that.
And so self-deportation was, and this is the third division in the camps, is Congress had always been eager to strip the Issei and the Nisei of their U.S. citizenship. I should say they've been eager to strip the Nisei of their citizenship and to deport both the Issei and Nisei to Japan, to be rid of the Japanese problem, if you will. So, and the barrier was always the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which says, if you're born on U.S. soil, you are a citizen. There's no loophole. And the Attorney General, Francis Biddle, in Roosevelt's cabinet, told that to Congress. Then he said, but you know what? I have an idea. If you get them to voluntarily renounce their citizenship in camp, then there's no legal barrier, because they do it voluntarily. So let's pass a law, and Congress did in July 1st, 1944, the Denaturalization Act, which for the first time will allow a U.S. citizen to voluntarily renounce or tear up my U.S. citizenship during times of war, for whatever reason, and taxes, and then the government starts pressuring the people at Tule Lake with lies that if you renounce your citizenship, you can stay at Tule Lake and not face violence on the outside. If you renounce your citizenship, you can your families can stay together on the journey back to Japan, I suppose. But you keep families together, stay in Tule Lake, and avoid any problems outside. And there are other kind of scenarios painted for them. Something about the draft too, that your boys won't be drafted if you know. Yeah, if you announce a citizenship, then your boys can't be drafted. All of which were appealing kind of ideas. And so 5,000 to the lake actually signed these papers to tear up their citizenship. Almost immediately, all 5,000 regretted their decision and tried to withdraw it, but it was too late. Justice Department says, we got them, you're going. One ship did leave, and the others were held back by the courage of another white lawyer from San Francisco, Wayne Collins.
Okay.
And I encourage you to talk to Sharon Yamato, filmmaker of One Fighting Irishman, story of Wayne Collins, because he was the one who fought in the courts to get back, to help these 5,000 people withdraw their renunciation papers. And at one moment, he almost had a class action suit ready to do it, like in a snap, have all 5,000. But then at the last minute, another person in the ACLU filed a counterclaim, and the Justice Department said, "Well, no, you have to do each one of those 5,000 individually." And this poor guy had to go through 5,000 people, some of whom were in Japan, some of whom were scattered. And after the war, they're scattered all over. And some of them were ashamed of what they'd done and weren't answering their mail, to type up affidavits with the message that, well, I renounced my citizenship because I was threatened by gangs at Tule Lake, and they threatened me with beatings if I didn't go along. Whether that was true or not, that was what Wayne Collins felt was the right message. And again, this is the story that's been carried down through families, through generations, leading to the kind of perpetual myth of the Tule Lake dissidents as pro-Japan, fanatical pro-Japan loyalists. Some were, but the idea was perpetuated in these affidavits, and it took Wayne Collins 10 years to go through all these 5,000 cases. And the last one was settled in 1965, 20 years after the war.
Wow.
Does it 10 years? 20 years. Yeah, it took 20 years.
So I wonder if we can switch into talking about lessons for today, but especially lessons for the future. What's the general message to all resistance movements that can be taken from this history?
Question authority. Question authority. That was a bumper sticker I had at college on my car. That fear of the other is what's going to continue to drive these oppressive movements against which we must continue to resist. So it's not just blindly resisting. It is understanding what the opponent is, understanding what you're up against, and underlying all that's happening that happened in World War II to Japanese Americans, and underlying all that's happening now. But it's fear of the other that seems to resurface like clockwork whenever America feels itself threatened, whether individually or collectively. So the only way to combat fear of the other is through empathy. And through literature, films, podcasts, to create a feel for other people so that you're not afraid of other people. Resistance, just understand what you're up against and how, what are the avenues you can take to combat it, to contest it.
I think we can end there. So thank you so much for your time, Frank. I really appreciate it. You are the premier authority. I've read your books, at least one of your books. I've seen your documentary. So I'll highly recommend everything that I've read, including Conscience and the Constitution, his incredible documentary. We'll have all links to those in the show notes so you can find all those materials. Thank you again, Frank Abe.
Thank you, Spencer.
Season 1 of History for the Reckoning is made possible by support from the JACL Mount Olympus chapter, as well as generous financial support from the Takahashi Family Foundation and the JA Community Foundation. The music was produced by Patrick Coffin. If you want to support the show, follow us on Instagram at History for the Reckoning. Sign up for our newsletter at History for the Reckoning on Substack, where you'll also find the show notes for each episode, or support us financially through Patreon at patreon.com/historyforthereckoning.